Hello and welcome to Esri Australia's video tutorial on how to get started with ArcGIS Field Maps. ArcGIS Field Maps is a mobile data collection app that allows anybody in the field to capture accurate data and return it to the office or the classroom for further use. It has been designed to replace the collector for ArcGIS application. Field workers use web maps on mobile devices to capture and edit data. Field Maps works even when disconnected from the internet. The next time your device is connected to the internet, the collected data will automatically transfer to your ArcGIS Online map. It is free to download and can be downloaded onto personal phone devices or tablets. All you need is your ArcGIS login credentials. In order to get started with Field Maps, you'll need to follow 4 steps. The 4 steps displayed on the screen at the moment. We'll go through each of these 4 steps in today's video tutorial, but we'll begin with step 1, Create. We're going to head over to ArcGIS Online to create and symbolize our feature layers specific to our fieldwork requirements. Once you've logged into ArcGIS Online, you need to head over to Content and then My Content. Once here, click on Create in the top left corner and choose Feature Layer. In the left-hand column, you want to select Build a Layer, and for today's video tutorial, we're going to choose points, lines, and polygons. I'm going to select that and we're going to create it. Now, before progressing any further, I'd like to provide some context for this particular video tutorial. In this tutorial, we will prepare feature layers, a map, and some forms, some data collection forms, in order to collect data at sites along a local waterway. At this point in time, if you had a specific objective in mind, you can apply the same steps that we follow in this video tutorial to your specific needs. However, with that in mind, I'm going to rename these points, lines, and polygon layers something a little bit more appropriate for my context. So I'm going to change point layer to collection sites. I'm going to change line layer to access paths. I'm going to change polygon layer to land use observations. I'm going to click out of that to lock them all in. I want to keep both of these values unchecked, and I'm going to click next. I need to pan and zoom and select my map extent. If you're working at a very local level, then you might want to zoom right into that specific area. I'm going to leave mine as showing all of Australia today. Then we need to enter a title, some tags, and a summary. I'm going to call mine ArcGIS Field Maps Training Data Collection along the Brisbane River. This tags I might choose to add and specify that's for a year 11 assessment task. And for a summary, I might describe why these feature layers have been created. These feature layers have been designed for year 11 assessment. Once I'm happy with my title, my tags, and my summary, I just need to click done. Sometimes I forget this as well, but we can only have a title that contains alphanumeric characters, and it has to have 120 characters or less. So let's get rid of this dash and swap it for an underscore and see if that solves the problem, which it seems to have done. And it might take a couple of minutes for your feature layers to create and then load. Once your feature layers have been created, the item page will open up. From here, we want to navigate from Overview over to Data. And at the moment, our data table is empty because we haven't collected any data. From here, we want to swap from Table to Fields, and we're going to configure some new fields in order to collect specific data. I want to make sure that my former points layer is selected, so that was my collection sites layer. And I'm going to add some fields for some specific data that I want to collect at each site along the local waterway. So I'm going to click Add, and in field name, I'm going to type in collection site. Now, the field name cannot have a space in it, but that isn't what our field workers will see in the field. They'll see the display name, which is allowed to have a space in it. So here, I'm going to write the same thing, but space it out. And we're going to change it from type string to an integer. Going to leave the other values as they are, and we're going to click on Add New Field. And you'll see in our field list, our new field that we just created has appeared, collection site. I'm going to click into collection site here, and we're going to create a list. Here we're going to specify how many sites we're actually collecting from. So our first label will be site A, and we're going to give it a value of 0. As we selected integers, these values have to be whole numbers. Site B is going to be of code or a value of 1, and our third and final site, site C, is going to be a value of 2. If you had more sites, you would simply continue to click add and add to those. I'm happy with these 3 sites, and I'm going to click save. And I want to navigate back out to where I can add a new field, so I'm going to click on this cross here. I'm going to add a new field as well. My second field is going to be pH level. For display name, I'm simply going to space that out, and I want to change it from string again. I don't want to choose integer this time, I want to choose double. If I was to choose integer, it means that we would have to come up with specific values that a student could input. Because a pH reading might result in a number of different values, we don't want to box our students or our field workers' results. So we're going to click on double, we're going to leave these values as is, and we're going to add new field. This time we don't need to click on our new field pH level, because we're giving students or field workers the freedom to put in any number or any reading of pH level that they find at the collection site, evidently between 1 and 14. However, that might also include decimal places. I'm going to add a couple more fields. We're going to add a water turbidity field, and we're going to simply space that out here, and we're going to choose integer again because we want to come up with some specific values that they can choose from. Going to click on water turbidity here. I'm going to create another list. Now here I need to decide how many different labels I want. My first one is going to be very cloudy, and you can see that I've entered these in before. Very cloudy, deep brown with significant particles. So I've just clarified exactly what I want the students to be looking for there. I'm going to give that a code of 0. I'm going to add a couple more. So cloudy, this time significant color and particles but slightly visible. So I'm giving them a little bit of differentiation each time. This time I'm going to go partially cloudy, some color and obvious particles. And then I'm going to go the other way, partially clear. There's a colored tinge, but there are fewer particles. Clear, no color, even fewer particles. And my last one will be very clear. There's no color and there's very few particles in the water. So by choosing integer, I'm essentially limiting my students or my field workers to select one of these 6 options. If I had a selected double, doesn't really work. So I want to give my students, my field workers, 6 different categories to choose from. I'm going to click save. I'm going to lock that in. I'm going to add one more. I'm going to add, this one's going to be called additional notes, which I always think is a really important field to add to add to the fields list, because sometimes things that are noticed at a particular site or when collecting data you haven't thought of, you haven't prepared for. So giving this option of additional notes allows students the freedom to make specific observations in the field. And I'm going to leave this as string because this is character based. And I'm going to limit it to 256 characters, meaning that students will have to be concise with their notes, but it also gives them enough characters that they can be detailed to. And I'm going to add new field. And again, I don't need to create a list for this because I want to give students the freedom to put in a response or put in some notes specific to the observations that they're making. Now you might at this point choose to add a couple of more fields for practice sake. For instance, you might choose to add a salinity field or a visual human disturbances kind of field. For the sake of this video tutorial, I'm going to leave it at that list, and we're going to swap over to access paths. Once we've swapped to access paths, we're essentially going to do the same steps. However, we're thinking about the types of data we might wish for students to collect on the path that they take to access the waterway or the site, the collection site. So with that in mind, I'm not going to go through an extensive list like we did last time. I'm just going to add a couple of fields. The first type of field I want to add is access path type. So I'm going to change this in the display name to type of access path. And I'm going to change it to integer. We're going to create a list. Add new field. And once that field appears in our list of fields down here, we're going to create a list. And I've created mine already, so they should hopefully pop up. But we want trail, so have they accessed it from some kind of trail, or is it a paved path to the waterway or the collection site, or did they have to forge their own path to the waterway? Perhaps they had to go through and navigate vegetation to get to the waterway itself. So I just want to quantify what kind of path and how they actually reached the waterway. You might specify to your students, hey, we will start this from approximately 50 meters from the waterway. I'm going to save that list and I'm going to cross it off. It might be that whilst they're on this path, they have a job to count the litter that they come across. And this might be useful data depending on the kinds of data that you're collecting. I'm going to leave it as integer because we can't have decimal places worth of data. But this time I don't need to create a list. I can simply add the new field and we're happy with that. It'll allow students later on, when we get to building our forms, to enter any whole number depending on the amount of litter that they encountered on their 50-meter walk to the collection site. And we're going to leave it there for access paths layer. I'm going to quickly swap to our polygon layer, our land use observations layer, and we might add one or two here as well. But again, think about your specific needs and what you might need to add or to create for your own fields. So for this one, I might just create one field, and this time I'm going to go with an animal count. Oh, and again, we can't have spaces in here, so I need to quickly fix that, but I can have spaces in this one, animal count, and I'm going to select integer, and I'm going to add a new field. Now it'd be important when setting this up, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on, but you would have to carefully measure out a certain area, maybe a 5 by 5 meter field with your polygon, and then count the animals within that field. But essentially we've now created all of the fields we need specific to the data we want our students to collect. From here, all we need to do is head over to overview, and the last thing I want us to check before we begin to create a map and symbolize our feature layers is to just click on one of these layers and ensure that on the right hand side enable attachments is on. That will allow us to take photos of the site whilst in the field, and attach them to the data forms that we create. So that's on. I'm going to simply click back up the top here, and if I wanted to, I could choose to view the other two and make sure that they are also on as well. Now that we've created our feature layers, we now need to save them in a map and symbolize them appropriately. So from the items page, we're going to click Open in Map Viewer. And once the map opens, we want to navigate from Details to Content, and you'll notice our three feature layers are there. And you can see that collection sites, access paths, and land use observations are there. We're just going to clean that up a little bit. If we hover over each feature layer and click the More Options button, we can rename that to collection sites, which cleans it up a little bit. I'm going to do that for access paths. And we're going to do it for land use observations. That just makes it really easy for my audience to make sense of. From here, you'll notice there's no data there. Again, we haven't collected data in the field, but we can symbolize what these feature layers look like. So I'm going to hover over our collection sites layer, and I'm going to click on the change style icon. And I'm going to change this attribute to show from show location only to collection site. And you'll notice that it has a red, blue, and green for site A, B, and C. I'm going to change that to something a bit more specific. So under types, unique symbols, I'm going to click options, and on the symbol for each one, I'm going to change it. So I'm going to go from fill to shape, click on the drop down, choose the A to Z category, and this time I'm going to choose A. I'm going to make the symbol a bit bigger, 20. I'm going to repeat that for site B, but I'm going to change the color, again making the symbol a bit bigger, and I'm going to change it again for site C, changing the color again, and hit OK. And now my symbol, I've personalized or symbolized the feature layers according to something that makes a little bit more sense for my field workers. To lock those changes in, I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to click Done. And I'm going to repeat the step for access paths. I'm going to choose my attribute type of access path, and I'm going to change these if I feel necessary. In this case, I'm actually quite happy with the color code. Green represents trail, which I think makes sense. Blue is paved, which I guess in a sense could represent some kind of footpath. And red, they had to forge their own path to the waterway. I'm happy with those three colors, so I'm actually going to click OK and click Done to lock it in. And land use observations. I only added animal count, but if I had have maybe added a field like type of land use and created a list to include things like commercial, environmental, recreational, social, etc., I might then click on that attribute and then color code that land use. However, for animal count, it doesn't really work symbolizing it, so we're just going to leave it as show location only. We're going to click Done. Now our symbols haven't been locked in yet. We need to head over to Edit, and you'll see that those symbols have begun to appear. We're going to Manage and make sure that the collection sites layer is chosen, and we're going to save those changes. It might take a moment, and then we're going to click on the layer at the top, change it to access paths. We're going to save those changes. And then finally, if you did make some changes to your land use observations, you would click Save Changes there. Please note that if you changed your symbols but didn't go to Edit and then to Manage and saved each of the changes for each of your layers, those symbols wouldn't be locked in and saved for when you're in the field. So that's really important. But I've essentially created the map and the symbols that my feature layers will show up on when data is collected. So the last step is to save our map. So we're going to click Save As, and data collection along the Brisbane River, or whatever happens to be the local waterway near you. Tags, I might actually add into mine field maps, training, tags, data collection, and summary if you wish to have one, and then you simply save your map. And if I return to my PowerPoint, that essentially finishes step 1. We've gone into ArcGIS Online, we've created our feature layers, we've symbolized them, and we've saved them to a map. This brings us to step 2, prepare. We're now going to head over to Field Maps, create a form with detailed instructions for how we want our data collectors to collect their field work. So if we head back to our Field Maps training map, we want to navigate back from here to Home. And once we're on the home screen, we want to find the little widget or button bar up on the top right corner. Click on that, and we want to find ArcGIS Field Maps. We need to click that, and it'll take us to the ArcGIS Field Maps. Might take a couple of moments to load. And we want to find the map that we just recently created, which contains our 3 feature layers. In this case, this is the map for me. I'm going to click on the text, the title, and it will open it up for me. From here, I want to navigate from the overview pane to the content pane. And I want to click on collection sites. And I want to start building my form. So I want to move from templates over to form. And you'll notice the 4 fields that we created in the previous step. I can start dragging them in and creating a form similar to Survey 123. So I'm going to start with what I think is the most logical. I want my students to determine or tell me what collection site they're at first. So I'm going to drag collection site over into the form box. I'm going to click on it. And by clicking on that particular option, I can add a couple of extra pieces of information. For instance, I'm going to add a hint that tells my students to please specify what collection site you are currently at. Remember, we created an integer for this, site A with a value of 0, site B with a value of 1, site C with a value of 2. So this would essentially have a drop down button, and by clicking on it they could choose either site A, B or C. And I always want to make my questions required, so I'm going to tick that on. And I'm going to let them edit their data in case they make a mistake. Maybe in younger years you don't want to give them that option to edit the data, but because I'm working with year 11 students, I'm going to trust them that if they make mistakes that they can edit their own data. I'm going to click back out from here. Oops. I'm going to click the properties button and I'm going to add the next one over. So instead of putting in hints for each one at a time, I'm going to add all of mine in at once. So the next thing I want them to create, to add will be pH. Then I want them to comment on water turbidity, and then if there is any, I want them to add some additional notes. So that will be the order that the form appears in the field. I'm going to click on pH level here and give them a hint. Measure the pH level of the water at this site. I'm going to put required, water turbidity, scoop a glass jar, or maybe a plastic jar because we're working with students, a plastic cup's worth of water out of the river and observe its turbidity. I'm going to require that question too. And additional notes. Are there any other observations? you would like to make about this site? Question mark. And I'm going to leave this as unchecked on required, because it might be that there are no extra notes, no extra observations that a student wants to add. Alternatively, you could click on required and they might you might force them to say no. But I'm going to leave it unchecked. Now I'm going to save that. And realistically, the same pattern for creating a form would exist for your access path and your land use observations. You would simply drag your fields in, depending on the order that you want them to be displayed, and then you would give them hints and maybe make them a required question. I'm not going to model those two steps for you today, because if you follow the first example with collection sites, it's the same process. Once I've finished my form, I could still change the order of the form if I do make a mistake, so don't feel like you have to start again. It's simple as clicking and dragging to your fields below and above each other. But remember, once you have finished creating your forms, you need to click on Save to lock those changes in.